Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Iowa Ideas. This is the second session block in the morning. This is the ninth year that we've been doing Iowa Ideas, which is an event that explores the topics of interest to Iowans, the challenges, the opportunities, and we're excited for the more than 50 sessions that we have over the 2 days, today and tomorrow. On behalf of the team at the Gazette, I'd like to give a special thank you to ITC Midwest for their presenting sponsorship, as well as all of you for taking part today. For questions, you'll be able to submit questions to the panel, entering them through the Q&A box that's at the bottom of the screen, or in the chat, and those will get relayed, and I will work those in to the conversation today. I'm excited to be joined by a group of panelists, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a second. But if you're wondering what session you're in, this is a conversation about ag exports, and Iowa's ag exports have been in the spotlight throughout 2025 with the trade agreements and relationships between countries seeing some shifts. But we're also going to have a discussion about exports and the emerging markets as well. And so we'll have a pretty forward-looking conversation, not just a spot of the moment. And so with that, I would like to introduce the panel. And Chad, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. My name's Chad Hart. I'm an extension economist with Iowa State University, and my main role is to talk about what's happening within the corn and soybean market. I also get the livestock as well. And with Iowa being a place that creates an incredible agricultural bounty, we do have to talk a lot at the farmer level about export markets, which markets are growing, which ones are shrinking, and what factors are shaping those markets.
All right. Ryan.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Ryan Sauer. I'm Vice President of Market Development at Iowa Corn Growers. And my role primarily focuses on expanding corn in all forms. So when we look at corn, obviously from an export perspective, but also the value-added products as well. It also includes the livestock, the meat products as well. So look forward to a fruitful conversation this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Trish.
Good morning, Trish Cook. I'm a farmer here in eastern Iowa near Winthrop. My husband and I raise corn and soybeans and pigs on our farm. We're actually hoping to finish our soybean harvest today and maybe get into corn. I'm a past president of Iowa Pork Producers Association. I'm currently serving on the National Pork Producers Council. So that's the policy side at the national level of pork. So glad to be here today.
All right. Thank you. And Grant.
Good morning. My name is Grant Kimberly, and I'm Senior Director of Market Development for the Iowa Soybean Association. I oversee all the market development and demand building programs for Iowa soy. That includes international marketing, biofuels, livestock initiatives, working with our partners there, bio-based products, value-added, anything that creates demand for soy is what we help to help push forward. I also am a farmer as well, grow corn and soybeans in the central Iowa area. So looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Well, I think for kind of a kickoff for just helping folks understand perspectives, kind of the opener that we'd go with would be, as we sit here today, we're in the busiest time of the weeks of harvest across the state, and there is some concern that we're hearing about the ag economy. And I would just say, as we sit here today, what's going well and what has you concerned? And Chad, maybe we'll start with the data guy.
Oh, sure. I think as we're looking at where we're at right now, as you mentioned, harvest is in full swing, so it's one of the busiest times from the supply side of the market. But it also turns out that harvest time is one of our busiest times from the demand side of the market as well. This is where we do see a bulk of our sales when it comes to many of our commodities here in Iowa. And so when we think about whether it's the export markets and our international partners, our biofuel partners tend to be very aggressive purchasers at this time of year because this is a time when we do tend to see our lowest prices of the year usually. And so that says that, we've got a lot of momentum on both sides of the market as we're looking at here. What's been going well? We have seen domestic demand remaining fairly robust. We have seen biofuel demand continue to propel our domestic usage along. And when it comes to livestock feed, while we have seen some shrinkage, especially in cattle, We're seeing growth on the pork side. We've seen it in poultry with our layers here in the state of Iowa, and that's been helping maintain that strong feed demand that we look for here. And the export markets are a mixed bag right now. The trade disputes over the past year have disrupted some relationships, but helped strengthen some others. And so, for example, as we look at corn right now, our export sales so far this year are up about 75% year over year. On the other hand, when we look at soybeans, we've seen those export sales drop by about 30% year over year. And then a bunch of Iowa commodities sort of fall in between those ranges. And so it's a very difficult situation to figure out just which way the ag economy is going to move based upon what we're seeing right now. Because we have seen, I guess I'll argue, our supplies have been able to exceed what our demands have been able to utilize. And that has led to lower prices over the last couple of years. And that has put a financial strain on our Iowa farmers.
Well, thank you. Ryan, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I would say probably the thing that keeps me up at night right now is the combination of lower yields. I mean, on the corn side, we are hearing of some lower yields in many parts of the Corn Belt. And then when you combine that with lower prices, it creates a pretty significant challenge in the farm economy today. And when you look at corn production in particular, I mean, I think I've seen numbers that we're going to lose about $15 billion this year on corn production alone. And that just is corn, right? That doesn't include some of these other commodities. So the overall state of the farm economy is in a really, really challenging situation. I would say as bad as it was since the 1980s. And so overall farm profitability is certainly a challenge and a concern. Obviously, we're in the middle of a government shutdown right now. So, Congress isn't getting anything done. There's a lot of things I think that we could be doing from a trade perspective, from a policy perspective, to create more demand domestically. For example, E15 is one of those items that could go out there and create more demand for corn today. And we've got a Congress that just isn't getting that done. And so there's certainly some things that are weighing on us, I think, from a government perspective side. And then as Chad mentioned as well, we need to move faster on the tariffs, on the trade front. We need to do more trade deals. And I know that's what this topic of conversation is about, but the quicker we can get more trade deals done, the better we're going to be.
Trish, you've been in the field. What does it look like from your vantage point?
Well, our bean harvest is probably about the best we've ever had, and we haven't nosed into corn yet, so we'll see what happens on that. But from a pork producer perspective, it is obviously half of the cost of raising a pig and getting it to market is feed cost. So while it is challenging to see what corn and soy are doing right now, the prices are really low. From a hog producer perspective, we are able to buy our inputs at a lot lower price. 2023 was probably the worst year in hog production that I've ever seen in my 30-some years of farming. And people don't really necessarily realize that because the sales value wasn't bad, but what got crunched on was the margin. We lost $50 a head easily. So that we dug a really big hole as a pork producer in 2023. And so 2024, lucky to break even. 2025, we are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. So I do understand right now what corn and soy are seeing, and the losses of their cost of production is more than what they're able to get for revenue. And but as a pig farmer, I am taking advantage. I'm locking in things right now, just going forward, because we all know how volatile the markets can be, and it can change quickly with a tweet or a social media post or anything like that. So from a pig perspective, 2025 is treating us pretty nicely. Like I said, it's really hard for livestock people to be, we're kind of the opposite of the grain world, right? Like when we can buy stuff cheaper, it's hard. So 2023 was a really good year for grains, but not a good year for pork. So I always, it's kind of like trade-offs in the agricultural industry. And something that we, in the pork industry, we're always looking to strengthen those free trade agreements. In pork, we sell more pork to the 20 countries we have free trade agreements with than all the rest of the countries in the world. So they do work. Obviously, everyone's experiencing some difficulty with China right now, and the pork exports are down to China as well. And one thing that China does buy from us that we need to find another market for is something called variety meats. So that's like a lot of the organs and things that in the United States we don't appreciate the value of or want to consume. But other countries like China really like it. And it does add about $7 a head to the value of a pig. Now, Vietnam could be the next market for that. They could take all of that product. That's a focus for pork, is to get into the Vietnam market for exports.
All right. I will ask more about that in a few minutes here. Grant, kind of as you sit today, what's good? What's of concern?
Well, I think everybody did a good job highlighting a lot of those same things that I probably would say as well. But I mean, certainly from a soy perspective, we are looking at all of the reports we've seen so far, and even on our own farm, soybean yields look to be pretty good this year. So the yield perspective looks to be good on soybeans. From a corn perspective, putting my farmer hat on, we've noticed that those yields are down due to some of the fungal diseases that I'm sure we'll maybe get into later. So one called Southern Rust. It did a number on things this year. So we're seeing some challenges there. But overall, farmers are always optimistic this time of the year. It's the harvest season. It's the time to bring in the crop. And so that part is what's positive. Then on the other side of things, we have a lot of market disruption and market uncertainty out there. That's what's not on the positive side of things right now. We have, as we've talked about, trade uncertainty, especially with our largest market, China. We might get into this more later, but the thing about China when it comes to soybeans is they buy 60% of the world's globally traded soybeans. There is no other market to replace China. So that's a challenge when you get locked out of that market. And we've not sold a single bushel of soybeans, new crop soybeans, into China yet, which is highly unusual. And, we're looking at new crop sales for soybeans at 20-year lows. And so that's a challenge. That's a big problem. Also on the biofuel perspective, there's uncertainty there because we're waiting for policies to be finalized related to the renewable fuel standard policy, the small refinery exemption policy, the 45Z tax credit policy. All those things are causing some, headaches and a lot of problems within the biofuel sector, especially in Iowa. We're the largest biodiesel producer, made from soybean oil, corn oil, animal fats, all those kinds of products. And that industry is basically at a standstill right now until that part of the policy piece of it gets finalized. We're hopeful that will get finalized next year. Or sooner than later. So that would be something that we're looking forward to. So we have a lot of challenges on the demand side, whether it's domestic or international, but that's what we can talk about further here today.
And maybe as a jumping off point, Ryan, you had mentioned we're in day 2 of a federal shutdown. And one of the questions that I have is about data and just even from the policy front, what can get done. And so maybe how do you see this shutdown, the federal shutdown, impacting where we are right now? And how big of a concern is that to you?
Well, I definitely think there's, from a USDA perspective, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around what is the USDA going to be able to provide us in terms of reports. Some of these reports are pretty timely from a market perspective, but also what does it mean from a value to the farmer in terms of data that they need to provide farmers every day. So it's certainly going to have an impact. I think the impact is still a little bit unknown at this point.
Chad, do you expect, have you seen whether you're going to continue to get some of the data that you rely on?
Oh, no, we know that's going to go missing and already has in certain cases here. For example, this morning, we should have had a weekly export sales report roll out, and that gives us a very up-to-date snapshot on not only how much we're selling to the rest of the world, but who is actively buying. And so that report for this week is already gone. One of the biggest ones that we're worried about and has already been announced as being postponed is what's known as the World Ag Supply and Demand Estimates Report. It's basically known as the WASDE. It is the monthly report that the markets definitely key on because it not only gives us a snapshot on what we're seeing in terms of U.S. supply and demand, but it also looks at global supply and demand. And especially this time of year, it's really critical that report and a companion report, which is known as the crop production report, that's outlines the yields that Ryan and Grant had talked about here earlier. That gets updated every month at that time. We know that data was being collected when the government shut down. We know that there's a lot of field data that comes in that's, literally live data from going out into farmers' fields and actually sometimes harvesting some of the grains and oilseed crops to send them into the lab to measure the yield. And those samples will be lost because of the government shutdown. So we're going to be missing a lot of government data that definitely fed into and helped support the market structure that we see and provided the signals to not only for farmers to sell their crop, but for end users as to what they needed to purchase that crop at. So it's a big deal to have the government shut down right now because, we're going to miss that data.
Okay. Grant, I wanted to ask a little bit about, you mentioned this in your opening comments, Southern rust, and is that a part of the data that the USDA collects in terms of even understanding the impact as well? Or are there other places that will track that type of information to even understand the condition and things that the condition of the crops?
Well, the data that they will collect is what they'll, as Chad has said, it'll be some of that yield collection data where they're starting to put some real numbers on there based off of real harvest results, and we won't have that data. The southern rust is just was a fungal disease that, with all the excessive rainfall and the heat that we saw this year, became a little bit more of a challenge on the corn side of the production side of the equation, and that impacted the yield. It took that yield down a little bit because it, in a way, just prematurely shut down the maturation process of that plant a little bit too quickly, and so that's why it'll have an impact in the sense that it's going to lower the yield somewhat from where we probably thought they were going to be earlier. And so the government shutdown just impacts it from a data collection standpoint and getting the numbers together as far as and where we think that the yields may end up being. And they're going to have a few more of these reports as the rest of the year goes on. But those reports are really important because they provide information to the marketplace and to farmers so they can make decisions on how to market their crops and decisions on when maybe makes sense to make sales.
Mm-hmm. And then, Ryan, you had mentioned this in your opening comments too. With the shutdown in place, are you able, do you expect any progress to be made on some of the tariff and trade policy front? Is that also at a standstill in terms of any movement?
I would say I don't know if it would have an impact. I know that there's still a lot of discussions happening in a lot of markets. For example, India is one of those markets that we've been heavily engaged in. And so, it may slow it down a little bit, but at the end of the day, I think as we continue to look, I think the Trump administration clearly knows that we've got to have more trade opportunities for both corn, beans, and other commodities. And so I'm hopeful that those negotiations will continue through the shutdown.
And maybe we can talk a little bit about, there have been a lot of trade trips that have happened this fall. And can you talk a little bit, about the goals of some of those trips? And, are you able to build connections that, start to build things and create movement with producers or customers that maybe don't rely on, the trade policy types of discussions, but are actual things on the ground that happen?
I think so. I think these trade missions are very, very important. At the end of the day, a lot of these folks in these countries, they want to see you. They want to understand how farmers are growing their products. They want to know that they're doing them safely and responsibly. And so, for example, we were just in India recently, and then Governor Reynolds went to India about 2 weeks after we were there. And, the purpose of that mission was really to continue to look at opportunities for trade in that country. I will tell you, in early August, we were very optimistic that a trade deal in India was going to get done. And then there was some things that happened at the federal level that kind of started to back that away a little bit, but we're hearing now that trade negotiations have restarted. USTR has been in India doing trade negotiations, and particularly with India, I think the opportunity relies around mostly DDGs, US DDGs, soybean meal, and sorghum. They're very keen on GMOs in that country. I think corn and soybeans could be an opportunity for that country in the future, but they also have 650 million farmers in that country, and they're going to really protect those farmers in terms of corn production. And so we've been really pushing for corn and DDGs and soybean meal to go into that country. You look at some of the growth over there, for example, their poultry industry is growing at 8 to 9% per year. And they're going to be really short on protein products. And that's where I think DDGs and soybean meal, sorghum, for example, could fulfill that. And I also want to say I really appreciate Governor Reynolds and Secretary Nagg's leadership on this. We brought an India delegation into Iowa earlier this week. We had the chance to meet with Governor Reynolds and Secretary Nagg again. They are absolutely leading from the front on this one and trying to make sure that they're talking to the right people at the federal level to get a trade deal done.
Grant, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, Ryan, everything he said makes a lot of sense, and I agree with as well. And again, we do applaud Governor Reynolds and Secretary Nagg for their leadership and helping to crack open some new market opportunities like what we could have in India. India, though, as to use another pun, they are a tough nut to crack, though, because they are, if there is a king of trade distortions and tariffs and anti ways to just keep trade out, it's India. They are one of the, because of what Ryan mentioned, they have so many millions and millions, hundreds of millions of farmers, and they want to make sure that, with a population like they have there, that they don't create unrest and other issues. And so they've got that to consider. But there are targeted opportunities, I think. Again, we have to be clear. India is not the next China. It just isn't. It might have the population, but it doesn't have the protein consumption cultural history that the Chinese have. And it doesn't have maybe even the general middle class income capabilities. I don't think that you could see in other parts of Asia. And then you throw on top of it the trade barriers and the other protectionism policies that they have to keep in mind with their very, very small farm population. But there is opportunities, and the opportunity is, I think, in some of these protein products, processed products, soybean meal, DDGs, ethanol, and Ryan was right on by saying their poultry industry is growing. Their younger generation does have a taste for more protein in their diet. They work in the cities. They like to go maybe even to KFC and those kinds of places, and that does make a difference. So opportunity there. It's going to be maybe a little slower and a longer process, though, I think. But then there's other opportunities around the rest of the world, too. And we have to continue to grow our opportunities in Southeast Asia, Latin America, the EU, Middle East. There's lots of places around the world that we can continue to chip away and to grow market share and to do better at. But then again, it still comes back from a soy perspective, especially to China. We just cannot not have access to that market. So that's what we have to. We're going to try to hit a lot of singles around the world, but we still have to get back into that big extra base hit kind of market like China is.
Grant, maybe can you expand a little bit about what it means when China is not purchasing soybeans from America, and how do you identify those places to what places even are even on the same scale to get those doubles or just that volume that China consumes?
Well, as I said before, they are 60% of the world market in soybeans. So there is no other market. The rest of the world combined is not big enough to offset them completely. But we can chip away and gain some market share opportunities in the EU, especially on soybean meal. Egypt is a great success story. They value U.S. soy. They have a preference for it. And those are the markets we're really targeting. We're talking about the quality and consistency of U.S. soy. And I think this goes for all of our agriculture export products. U.S. agriculture has a quality consistency message and sustainability message that really nowhere else in the world can match. And so we have to really maximize that message in these different markets, especially the markets that value those kinds of things. And as I had said, Egypt, the EU, there's opportunity there. Some of Southeast Asia. The Philippines is a great success story. They value U.S. soybean meal there. They're one of our larger markets. And they will pay more for U.S. soy even because they see the value and consistency there. Mexico, of course, in our backyard is a great market for all of our agriculture commodities, but especially for soybeans and whole soybeans and soybean meal. So those are the different markets we have to just keep working around the world. I actually had the opportunity to be in Japan and South Korea here a few weeks ago. Those are not what we call growth markets. They're mature markets, so they're not really growing, but they are still stable, strong markets, and markets that we've had long-standing history there. The U.S. soy industry first opened an office and worked in that market in 1956. It was the first office the U.S. soy industry ever opened. So we're coming up on the 70th year anniversary of that. And that's what Ryan has said. Relationships matter, especially in the Asia markets, but all over the world, really, for that matter. And we have to just be there. You have to have boots on the ground. You have to be working with those buyers, understanding their marketplace, and you have to be there to do that.
I was going to maybe expand from there. What does it take in terms of building these relationships? So obviously that's been in place for a long time, but what is the realistic, and how do you go from identifying opportunity to, how long does that take? How are you working to identify, and is it a coincidence we're seeing and hearing about more trade missions right now? Or is this, things that are always kind of happening in the background?
A little bit of both, I think. The trade missions are part of it. And our farmers are our best marketing tool that we have. They're our best salesperson because those buyers like to hear and see from the farmers. They like to understand how our agriculture products are grown and taken care of, and they want to hear directly from the producer. And so we take the producers over to some of these markets and visit with those customers. Those customers also likewise come back to the U.S. to visit our farms and our grain elevators and our processors and everything else. And so that's part of it. And then the other part of it is then having our national organizations. We have all of us work through international export organizations like the U.S. Soybean Export Council, the U.S. Grains Council, and the U.S. Meat Export Federation. All those different groups we've all been participants of and work with. They have offices in most of these countries. I mean, in a lot of cases, probably 80 to 90 countries or more around the world. And they have people with boots on the ground working every day with the industry over there, doing projects where we're helping them find better ways to use our products so they can increase demand. And then we talk about that consistency, reliability, and sustainability message as well. In Japan, there's a U.S. soybean sustainability trademark, basically, that you see on just about every product that has soy in it when you go into the 7-Eleven or wherever it might be in these stores, because the consumer over there does value products that they see from the U.S. And I think the same thing on the meat products. We have some of those labels that can go on U.S. Origin meat as well. So those kinds of things is some of the activity that we have to continue to work on, and we have been and we continue to.
Trish, you mentioned that kind of in your opening comments about finding other markets, and as a producer, what does it take? When you're trying to do that, what is that building the relationship? How do you start to, open minds that something could happen?
Yeah, a couple different things come to mind. You guys did mention the trade missions that Iowa Economic Development puts together, and that's kind of the barnyard with beef and pork, as well as the grains that travel on those. And so those are great opportunities to meet with actual folks who are buying large quantities of pork. And just like Grant said, they do want to talk to the farmers. They do want to find out how you raised your animals, and they want a reliable partner with a consistent product and reliability in the ability to supply it. They don't want people in and out of the market. One thing on the National Pork Producers Council is they've had several meetings with U.S. Trade Representative Secretary Jamison Greer or his office, not necessarily him, but his office. And so they're having good conversations about where are target markets that pork wants to get into. And as I mentioned, Vietnam is far and above our number one target market to get into. Again, we all have a lot of reliance on China to take all of our products. And in the pork aspect, we actually do have another off-ramp, and Vietnam would be the off-ramp if we cannot, send our variety meats to China. If we can get a trade agreement with Vietnam that not only, a free trade agreement, as well as remove the non-tariff barriers that can go along with that, that would be just a super burst, of hope for the pork industry.
A question for anyone here, but you're also having to kind of keep tabs on competitors. And while, there may be advantages to America, how do you keep tabs on some of these other systems? And how do you understand what may, or even understand the competition, so to speak?
Well, I'll start from the pork perspective. Our biggest competitor is Brazil, which I know I'm going to see some head nods from other folks in this meeting, but they are the least cost producer in the world from the pork perspective. So when we lose market share in a country, Brazil is just really ready to be right there and grab it up. So once you lose market share, it's hard to get that back.
So I'd say that's one of the things we rely upon the U.S. Department of Agriculture to do. They have offices in, I believe, 140 countries. They have attachés that report back what's happening within that country in agriculture. And that really gives us a good sense of not only what's happening with our competitors, but what's happening with our customers as well. And so that's why we rely so much on these government reports. You're not only getting, if you will, on the ground information from here in the U.S., but you're getting that same on the ground information from a bunch of different countries through USDA. And that does help us keep tabs on our competitors, figure out, are we competitively priced or not? What is happening with their crops or livestock that might influence our ability to either gain or lose market share within a market?
Jack, I would add Brazil as well from the corn perspective, or South America in general. But what's interesting about that part of the world is they're obviously building more corn-based ethanol plants, which is good because they're using more of their corn. But obviously, then that puts more ethanol and DDGs on the world market. The other thing I would say is from a carbon perspective, they're much lower in their carbon footprint because they can double crop down there. And so when you look at a score of a ethanol-based plant in Brazil versus U.S., we're at a disadvantage. And so how do we continue to put the right technologies in place, whatever that might be, in order to make sure that we are competitive on a global stage from a carbon perspective? It feels like in this country we are deprioritizing carbon, but it certainly feels like in other countries they're not. And so we've got to keep that at the forefront of our mind.
And I would add the Brazil and Argentina, the South America. I mean, that is U.S. soy's biggest challenge as well. And because, I would put the flip side on the sustainability side of it, though. They're bringing a lot of land into production, and that's why they're a challenge. They grow every single year pretty much. And so they're constantly increasing their production, especially Brazil. And, quite frankly, maybe it's in some areas that are more environmentally sensitive and they should probably not be increasing that production and changing those acres. But that's a challenge. And for all of agriculture, I believe, all of at least the row crop and the animal agriculture sector, because that's how they're going to compete, they can get 2 crop cycles a year based off of where they're located in the world and their weather supply or weather conditions. So that's part of our challenges as well. And I think the bigger picture issue that we as a Midwestern agriculture industry have to grapple with over time, because the global market, while growing, is not growing as fast as they are bringing new land into production down there. So, how do we compete with that long term? Where does the future go for the U.S. farmer? Because if it's only on price, that's going to be a challenge, because they'll be able to do things at a little less expensive way down there. So that's a big picture issue for later.
I was curious, Trish, this came up in some of the opening comments, but without having the data to understand, when to sell, how do you approach that? Maybe generally, and how do you approach it when you're flying maybe with a little less information than you would want to have? Do you sit and hold, or throw it in a grain bin, or how do you approach that?
Well, our farm is a little bit different. We feed all of the corn that we raise to our pigs, and then we buy quite a bit more. So we're not marketing any of our corn. We are buying DDGs, so we're very sensitive to understanding the price of corn from this perspective that we're buying, not selling. Same with bean meal. We sell our beans, and then we buy bean meal back from a crusher. So, so we're not, directly feeding our soybeans, but and then as far as selling on the hog side, obviously we have a perishable product. We can't just put that in a bin. We have to keep current with that. So we try and use some risk management tools like livestock risk protection, the LRP program, as well as doing futures and options on the board. So I'm probably not the best one to ask about how to sell grain because we're just selling our beans.
That's fair. Chad, you came off mute. Were you going to add something there?
Oh, no, just coming off cough. But I will say this, that, while we don't have the government information, the markets are still, providing prices. We still know where prices are at. It's just that you're entering into that transaction with a little more uncertainty than you have in the past. And that's the deal. As farmers are making those decisions, whether as Trish said, on the livestock side, you don't have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of choice on the timing because it isn't a perishable product. That animal has to move when it has to move. When it comes to the crops, we do have the ability to store a bit more, and it gives us more leeway as to when we market. But I would say that decision is still being based upon what you're seeing in terms of prices today versus prices that we see on, for example, the Chicago Board of Trade or Chicago Mercantile Exchange for, months down the road. Mm-hmm. Those prices are still out there today with the government shutdown. The markets still function. They just don't have a full set of information as usual.
Yep.
And we've been a little bit lucky on the livestock side that they have deemed the livestock mandatory reporting as necessary function. So we are still getting daily a couple of things one's called cutout, one's called the CME index and cash. And a lot of farmers, we have 2 different contracts with 2 different packers, and those numbers are what our contracts are based upon, a percentage of or something plus or minus. So it's been really appreciative that they did deem those reports as necessary. But I know, as we're hearing here today, that not all of the reports coming out have been that lucky.
Trish, did that change in COVID, or has that always been the case? Or
it's been an administrative thing. During Trump's first administration, it was also, those were deemed essential reports. So those were able to happen, but were not deemed necessary I'm not even sure. Did we have a shutdown in a Biden administration? It was really close. I'm not sure it happened, but they were not going to publish those in that time frame. So flavor of the administration.
Yep. Okay. The other question that I wanted to ask, so we've been on the farm with a lot of the questions, but are there ripple effects when we see the exports? What are the economic ripple effects that are there when we see exports go down and some of this trade uncertainty? That maybe folks, I'm a city kid. I should have owned that right at the beginning. Probably could tell with some of my questions. But what are those ripple effects that maybe folks don't necessarily know are there when we see the exports change?
Yeah, I can start. I live in a rural community. Buchanan County doesn't have a major metropolis of economic opportunity. So a lot of the economy in this county is driven by agriculture, as in many counties in Iowa. So there's very much a trickle down effect. If the farmers are not selling their grains this fall, then they're not going to have money to put towards new equipment or maybe an upgrade to their grain drying system or just all the different things that go along with that. So there's very much a ripple effect with that.
I would add, go ahead, Chad.
No, I was going to say, go ahead, Ryan.
I would add, certainly, when you think about agriculture here in Iowa, it's the biggest driver of GDP, right? And so when you think about what it means for communities, what it means for equipment. We've seen John Deere having to do layoffs, others as well. That it has a huge impact, absolutely huge impact on just the overall state of the economy. And so I think when the ag economy is not doing well in Iowa, there's a lot of other industries that are suffering as well.
Yep, it tends to feed across. If you think about, for example, another big sector for us is manufacturing, but our biggest manufacturer is an ag manufacturer, John Deere. When you think about another big sector, finance and insurance, well, the biggest chunk of that is actually crop insurance, again, related to agriculture. Next big chunk in the Iowa economy, government spending. One of the biggest departments, though, is the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. Next thing down the line, real estate. And the biggest chunk in that, farmland. So as you look at all the major sectors of the Iowa economy, they all trace back to agriculture. And that's why when you look at many states across the nation, they have those same sorts of connections. So typically, as the ag economy is going, that tends to indicate something about where the general economies of each state are going because of those connections.
Yeah, I mean, it just has a ripple effect through everything. When farmers are not making any money, they're not going to spend money throughout the economy, and then that just has all kinds of impacts throughout the various sectors that everybody's mentioned here. So, and another thing that we maybe haven't touched on yet too is on the trade uncertainty side. It's tariffs that we have on a lot of our inputs that impact our inputs that farmers have and have raised our costs, like tariffs on fertilizer and steel and aluminum that impacts machinery costs and those kinds of things. So those are other ripple effects that we've seen here.
Zach, one other thing I just want to add that we haven't really called out yet is mental health. When you see a farm economy that we have more concern about the mental health of our farmers, right? As we see more bankruptcies and those things happen. And so I think we just got to be cognizant of that and make sure we're helping our friends and neighbors and keeping an eye out for those things because they are real.
And I know that we do have a conversation right after the lunch break today about mental health and protecting the health of farmers because I think that is, I was surprised just some of the comparisons back to 1980 within the week. That was something to me that, that's an alarm as folks are starting to mention that. That's a different line in the sand than I think, a tough year. References there to the farm crisis of the 80s. That's very serious.
Yeah, that's very true. And remember, the financial challenges haven't just happened overnight here. I mean, we've been in a downturn from an at least a row crop ag perspective for a couple of years now. Actually, it's just getting more acute here more recently. And yes, we are hearing those stories of some, unfortunate, situations with farm families and some very sad tragedies, and that's very reminiscent of what you heard in the 80s too. So that's something that we have to keep a close eye
on. I think that one of the other questions that I wanted to ask, I think Trish, you had brought it up in your comments about once you lose market share, it's really, really hard to get it back. And how concerned are you that some of the short-term things? I think it was Argentina had sold a massive amount of soybeans to China within the last few weeks. When you see those losses of market share, what goes through your head in terms of the ability to get that back? How is this a short-term problem that, okay, if we get a new agreement signed, fixed, or how difficult do you think that this challenge will be?
Yeah, I'm probably most familiar with the pork side of it more than I am on the corn or the soy side. But yeah, I always in the back of my head, well, we'll have to backfill somebody else then, right? Because if Brazil's sending their pork here, then maybe we can backfill wherever is not buying from Brazil currently. So that's how I kind of keep my head above water when I think about these things, to try and not get overwhelmed if we lose market share. But I also, think that it's the importance of free trade agreements. I understand the concern of soy with China and how much soybeans China normally buys, but we have a lot of untapped markets in the pork industry. So I still keep optimistic about the opportunities for free trade agreements on the pork side. So specifically Vietnam, their market could be as large as Mexico, and Mexico is our number one customer for pork exports right now.
So Zach, if I may, when you're thinking about these markets, I would describe it as it takes a long time to build those trade relationships, but they can be damaged very quickly. And that's the concern as we're looking here. And I would point out things like, Trish mentions trade agreements. You build those over time with those relationships you're building with the farm visits and the trade junkets that we see both coming to the U.S. and visiting those other countries. And that's how you build that, relationship to start to build that market share. And when you think about what we've done here within the U.S., we definitely are trying to keep tabs on, like I say, not only our competitors, but our customers, and figure out how do we best serve their needs when it comes to agricultural products. But we're also keeping an eye on where is the potential for the largest growth. And that's where we tend to concentrate our trade discussions. One of my favorite ones to watch over the past decade has been Colombia. And I think for a lot of folks, they wouldn't necessarily think of Colombia as a good growth market. But what we have found over the time that we've spent working with that government, making connections with the industry groups down there, is that market has grown in importance over time. It is now our third largest market when it comes to corn exports. They are up in the top 10 in several Iowa commodities now when it comes to trade volumes. And that's because we've spent the time to build that relationship and have lowered the tariff and trade barriers to where we've got a good flow of products moving into that Latin American country. And so that's exactly the type of growth that we've been working towards over the past several decades when it comes to U.S. agriculture, and the ones we hope to continue to build in the future.
And remember, Colombia, we have a free trade agreement with, CAFTA. It falls under the CAFTA agreement. So those agreements do matter.
Yeah, for Colombia, it's the number 6 country that the U.S. exports pork to, and that has really risen a lot in the last year. So it's really important.
Yeah, and it's an important market for soy as well.
Mm-hmm.
What drives that growth? I mean, that is interesting to me. Colombia is not a market that I would have, to hear that it's number 6. That's a surprise to me. What's driving that growth so significantly and so quickly?
Combination of population growth, but most importantly, income growth. When you look at the markets where we've seen the largest, changes for us positively in terms of trade, it's often linked to growing incomes within that country, which leads to higher consumption. When people receive more money, we tend to spend more money. And especially in this case, I like to describe it as the best way most folks can improve their life is improve their diet. And so that often means trading up in protein sources, moving from plant-based proteins to animal-based proteins. And that helps, if you will, spur trade relationships with the U.S. because that's our game. Whether you're talking about the crop side of our markets or the livestock side, ultimately we're talking about increasing protein availability across the globe. We grow the crops to feed the livestock. Both sides, we actually export the crops to also feed livestock as well. And so you can think of it as we're always in the protein business, and that's linked to income.
And kind of a fun fact about pork, it is the world's most globally consumed protein, like more than beef, more than chicken. I know, I think we're kind of getting closer on that, but it's just like it's worldwide. And especially some of those parts of the world really love their pork. Central America, Mexico, Asia Pacific, love their pork products.
How do you go? I'm curious what level of collaboration you guys have with each other in terms of approaching some of these markets to grow. you know, are the ones that overlap in multiple areas. So, if there's potential for pork and soy, do those immediately jump to a higher prioritization, or how do you prioritize, and what level of collaboration do the different associations have with each other in terms of, figuring out overlaps?
Well, I would say, all of us are members usually of our the Meat Export Federation, as I mentioned, which, is the international organization that is responsible for growing red meat exports, beef and pork. So that's one way we collaborate and work together. We provide some funding for different activities, promotions, research, those kinds of things, market development. In a lot of cases, the other international organizations that are soy, corn, pork focused, a lot of times these organizations have, their main offices and overseas offices usually are right next to each other. Usually they share office buildings. And so there's coordination and there's communication at that level. Then there's also coordination and communication back here in the States from the grower board level between the various boards. And so, yeah, and there's other times where, our issues are a little different. And so we have our own initiatives and programs too, and do that as well. But there's certainly some coordination and some joint activity.
I would say too, most farmers are growing corn and soybeans, so there's a ton of collaboration. And obviously a lot of farmers are growing pork and beef and other things as well. There's a lot of collaboration as well that happens with trade missions. I know we talked about trade missions earlier, but there's oftentimes where farmers on the corn, pork, and soybean side are going to a certain country to promote their product. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens internationally.
Ryan, you mentioned a comment that, right at the beginning, and I wanted to follow up on that in the time that we have, of levers that could be pulled now, in terms of where do you think the prioritization of, levers to pull now to, whether it be your trade agreements, whether it be, what are the kind of what would be the priorities for each of you?
I think about it short term and maybe even long term. Short term, we need demand today. I think we all agree on this call. We need more demand for our products today. And so what are those short term things we can do to find more demand today, particularly with the state of the farm economy? From the corn side, clearly we need E15, right? We need to get E15 passed year round. That needs to be the law of the land. We need to continue to create more demand domestically for the products. Internationally, it's certainly, a lot more trade agreements. I think, there's been trade agreements with Vietnam, the UK, Japan. Those are all very, very good. Vietnam as well. And so continue to do that. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is these trade agreements are not free trade agreements. And so with one stroke of a pen, they can be gone with the new administration. And so while it's great that we're getting these trade deals and we need these trade deals desperately, we've got to make sure that we keep them long term as we think about the future. And so to me, it's really a play internationally, but also how do we get the right policies in place to try to start creating more demand today?
I would say some of the levers from a soy perspective that we're advocating for is, first and foremost for us, we are asking the administration to prioritize a trade agreement with China that immediately expedites soybean purchases and resumes normal purchases back to the Chinese market. Because each day that passes is, it's just another day that narrows that window of time and before South America's exports become available to the global market with their harvest season. And that kind of closes that window. So that's something for sure. Finalizing domestically here the renewable fuel standard, RVO, renewable volume obligation volumes that they are obligated to do here in the very near future for the 2026 and 2027 year would help creates that other domestic demand. And so that's another area we're advocating for. And then making sure that we continue to not have any disruptions on any of the other markets. U.S. soy has been lucky in the sense that we really did not face many trade barriers in most other markets around the world. So we already had pretty good market access. We just want to make sure that we don't lose that and make sure that we can resume and have normal trading opportunities, moving forward. And then lastly, it's hard to talk through this, but because of the challenges, because of the timing and everything, I think there is going to have to be some kind of mitigation bridge strategy here to help farmers through this difficult time, at least on the row crop side of things, because a lot of these things are outside of their control and geopolitical in nature. So, those are the kinds of things that I think we're going to have to see here in the next at least several months.
I can go next if you want.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
just want to talk real quick on something. I know our topic is about exports, but I do want to address something domestically that's hurting pork, and that's the state ballot measures that put forth arbitrary, non-scientific rules about how to raise pigs, specifically California's Prop 12 and Massachusetts Question 3. They put forth these arbitrary guidelines, and those states raise less than 1% of all of the U.S. pork, and their rules are not allowing pork to come into their state unless they follow their arbitrary rules. In Iowa, we raise 1/3 of the U.S. pork supply. We have 25 million pigs, 8 pigs for every person in the state. And consumption in California has gone down 20% because it's gone down. Their prices are about 20% higher and consumption's gone down 15%. So within domestic policy of each state, we're hurting ourselves as far as people having access to economical protein source. So I know you can't have a meeting with a pork producer and not have us complain about Prop 12, but it's a real problem. And the bigger problem is that if we have the other 40 states enact legislation, we could have 50 sets of rules for how to raise a pig, and none of them are based upon science. None of them are based upon wanting, a reasonably priced product for consumers, and so that everybody can have bacon and sausage on their table. And again, I will do the rah-rah for Vietnam. That's where we want to get exports for pork.
Grant, in your comment, you mentioned kind of the next few months. Maybe take us through that line of, obviously harvest is happening now. It takes a few months for policy types of things to take shape. How urgent is figuring out a bridge, for the farmers? I would imagine, depending on a variety of factors, whether you own land, whether you what your storage is, probably has a factor of how you can weather the current space. But how quickly do some of these things need to sort themselves out?
Well, so on a couple things there. I mean, it just you have once you get through harvest season, then the farmer starts to make the plans for the next season, right? And you're going to be looking at what fertilizer you're going to apply for the next season. You need to make those purchases. You're going to start looking at seed purchases for the next year. Do you have any machinery issues you need to make repairs or trade anything? Of course, in the current market environment, most farmers are going to pull in the horns and won't be able to probably do anything. But all those things will require conversations with their banker, and those banker conversations start here very soon as well, especially as you get to the end of the year. And there'll be some hard conversations, I think, this year, because many farmers are going to be losing several $100,000s or more on their operations, depending on the size and the structure, as you said, land ownership or rental ownership situation. So that's why that those kinds of things come up as a topic. And then when it comes to the trade side, especially on soybeans, and due to the nature of the South American harvest and North American harvest dynamics, we have a window where we make the majority of our export sales, and that window starts in September. As we know, it's now October, and that window tends to start to close pretty quickly come February. Maybe even January if South America has an early harvest. And so that's why, and when you make these sales, when buyers buy soybeans or they buy other commodities, usually you're looking at least a 30, maybe a 60-day lead time. You can't just go call Uber and get a 60 Panamax size vessel to show up on your doorstep within the hour or the next day. It takes maybe a month or more to line up the ocean-going logistics of these massive grain vessels that you're going to see traversing the oceans. And so that's something that takes time. And so if we don't get a deal done with China until November, optimistically, I think, then you're looking at least probably the end of the year before you actually start seeing sizable shipments that could reasonably occur, maybe even a little bit after that. So then that means our window is what, 1.5 months to make the majority of our export sales. And that's probably just not possible this year now, quite frankly. And I'm not, we'll have to see if a trade deal gets done in the next 30 days or not. And if it doesn't, then you're looking out a little bit further than that. And then that window is probably almost closed. So that's why we have to talk about all these different scenarios and options and think through, how it's going to impact everything.
Well said. Well, I appreciate the time. We've reached the end of the hour, and so I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. Thank you to each of you for taking time with me and helping to understand some of the intricacies of these issues, and also just the helping share your information as well. So to our panelists, or to our participants, I'm sorry, we now have a 5-minute break, and the next session will start in 5 minutes. And so you'll want to head there to the next session. So thank you very much.